Good morning. This is Bishop Phoebe of the Episcopal Diocese of West Tennessee, and welcome to Faithfully Memphis. Every Thursday morning, we have an opportunity to broadcast from WYXR 91.7 FM here in Crosstown Concourse in Memphis and interview a guest to learn more about their life and their ministry and the role of faith. So each week we begin our program with the Saint of the Day. And today, February the 17th, is actually the feast day for Janani Luwum, who was the Archbishop of Uganda. He was born in 1922 in Uganda near the Sudanese border and ordained as a priest in 1956. He came back to Uganda after study in Canterbury to begin his priestly ministry. In 1969, he became Bishop of Northern Uganda, and then in 1974, he was elected Archbishop, or one of the primates in the Anglican Communion. In this new position, he found himself having to deal with the Ugandan military dictator Idi Amin, and really worked hard to protect his people from the brutality of Idi Amin's regime. In August of 1976, a number of Christian leaders from throughout Uganda drafted a public letter protesting against officially sanctioned rape and murder as part of the Amin administration. And of course, that caught the attention of Idi Amin. So on February the 16th, 1977, President Amin summoned the Archbishop to his palace, along with several other Anglican bishops, the Roman Catholic Archbishop, and a senior leader of the Muslim community. So Archbishop Luwum was also very committed to interfaith and ecumenical relationships. At the time, at the meeting, Archbishop Luwum was accused of being part of a plot to murder President Idi Amin, and the other members of the clergy were allowed to leave, but he was ordered to remain behind. And as the rest of his companions departed, Archbishop Luwum was quoted as saying, "They're going to kill me, but I'm not afraid." And of course, unfortunately, he was never seen alive again. The next day, the government announced that he had been killed in an automobile accident while he was resisting arrest. But the truth came out several weeks later when his body, which was riddled with bullets, was released to the family for burial. Early in his relations with the Idi Amin's government, Archbishop Luwum was quoted as saying, quote, "I do not know how long I shall occupy this chair. I live as though there will be no tomorrow, and while the opportunity is there, I preach the gospel with all my might, and my conscience is clear before God." Since 2015, Uganda has actually had a public holiday every year on February 16th to celebrate Archbishop Luwum's life. And on that day, most of the schools and businesses in the country are closed. We remember him today as a reminder that for many Christians still throughout the world, they face great persecution. They are not able to publicly demonstrate their faith, and that for those of us who are people of faith, sometimes we too may face difficult choices where to proclaim the reign of Jesus and to adhere to his loving life-giving and liberating way of moving in the world, as our own presiding Bishop Michael Curry has described it, may come at a cost. So the prayer that we use to celebrate Archbishop Lumumba is as follows. O God, whose Son, the Good Shepherd, laid down his life for his sheep, we give you thanks for your faithful shepherd, Janani Lumumba, who, after his Savior's example, gave up his life for the sake of his flock. Grant us to be so inspired by his witness that we make no peace with oppression, but live as those who are sealed with the cross of Christ, who died and rose again, and now lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. So this morning, our special guest in the studio is Noah Glenn. He is a fellow Arkansan from North Little Rock. He wears a number of hats. He's an award-winning independent filmmaker. He runs Perpetual Motion, which has actually produced a number of short videos for the Diocese of West Tennessee. He's also the creator and host of a podcast entitled Like You, Mindfulness for Kids, and he writes and composes music, so a completely creative soul. So Noah, welcome to Faithfully Memphis.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here, and it's great to actually be in the studio and not have to be doing this remotely. So can you tell us a little bit about growing up in North Little Rock and what the role of faith was in your life as a child?
Sure. Well, yeah, I grew up in the church, every Sunday. My mother, when I was young, was the director of children's ministry at the church we went to, and grew up in several different non-denominational churches. So it was much later in life that I began to learn a little bit more about what are these different denominations and where might I fit in the big picture of all of this.
Great. So you have so many different creative hats, and I wonder, are there different parts of your creative spirit that are fed by all the various avenues of filmmaking and producing films and doing videos and composing music and doing the podcast? Like, how do all of those strands come together for you?
That's a good question. I think, yes, they speak to different parts of me, and music, of course, while there can be lyrics that offer you some sort of message or story to connect to, music can also be something that you just connect to wordlessly, that you feel the music. And for film and for reading, for literature and that sort of thing, I'm always drawn to stories. And really the ability to connect people through shared experiences and to see something on screen that you can relate to feel like you're not alone, to feel like someone else gets an experience that I've had. And I say these days that there's, in my 20s, I was really focused on music. Later in my 20s is when I found filmmaking, and it's been just in the last few years that I've been podcasting. So at some point I realized I'm sort of ambivalent about what the medium is. It's more about how you're connecting with people through those things.
It's wonderful that you have so many different outlets to do that. So we're really here to talk about this wonderful podcast, Like You, Mindfulness for Kids. And I've had a chance to listen to a couple of episodes. I have to say, I love your artwork. The little girl who's got the headphones on, sitting as the representation of your podcast. And I wonder, what was the genesis of that? What led you to think that mindfulness and affirmations and centering would be helpful for kids, or even something that kids could relate to?
Yeah, well, I'll say the artwork. I'll shout out our illustrator, Maya Sane, created the illustration that's on the cover of the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And they do wonderful, wonderful work. In 2018, I left a job that I had for about 7 years as a creative director at a nonprofit to do freelance video production work. Mm-hmm. And that's when I started Perpetual Motion that you mentioned earlier. And that's a natural time in a big transition like that to think about, what am I really doing? What do I really want to be doing? Mm-hmm. And, you know, I'd always known I wanted to do something creative in some way. Mm-hmm. But at that point in my career, it became about like, but what's the underlying meaning, the purpose of what I'm doing? And I just thought about how I'd always been both interested in childhood and how experiences in childhood shape us and lead to who we become. Mm-hmm. But it was also the things that broke my heart most often were seeing stories of kids in less than ideal circumstances. Yep. And so I started thinking about how I could bring together my creativity to meet the needs of kids. I'm at that time had recently become a father. Mm-hmm. I now have 2 daughters, and reconnected with Mr. Rogers,
yes,
which I grew up watching.
Me too.
And you know, Mr. Rogers is a much slower, calmer experience than a lot of modern children's television. Mm-hmm. And actually, I was watching it a lot, even without my kids, to learn about being a parent and to learn how to relate to kids. And for a while, I was like, I don't think my kids would even like it if I showed it to them. It'll be too slow for them. Mm-hmm. And then I finally did, and saw how they engaged with that program. And one thing that I learned a lot from that was just speaking to kids as, you know, on their level, not speaking down
to them, yeah,
but relating to them as just another person. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what kids respond to on a show like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, is that they feel like a peer and they feel like a respected individual in the way that he speaks to them with care. And so all these experiences, I thought I want to get involved in children's media, and didn't know exactly what that would look like for a while. And then started noticing how many of my friends and peers in their 20s and 30s and 40s were turning to mindfulness and self-care and therapy and all sorts of things to kind of dig down and understand themselves for the first time in their lives in their 30s, to understand what the feelings that they had maybe been taught to shove down. And I saw how much flourishing there was in the lives of my friends, and I thought, there's no reason that kids can't, having that respect for them as intelligent and full human beings,
right?
There's no reason that they can't benefit from these things I see adults benefiting from. And then even coupling that with realizing for the first time or not realizing for the first time, but reconnecting with what the experience of childhood is like, seeing the fears and the anxieties that my children were experiencing, talking to other parents who had the same sorts of things, And I started looking for something to play for my daughter when she had trouble sleeping, when she, and I didn't find a lot that I felt like I could, often in those moments, unfortunately, a child doesn't want to listen to the parent.
Right.
As good of advice as I would try to give her. And I found that putting on a song would calm her better, hearing someone else's voice. And I was looking for a podcast that I could play for her, and I didn't quite find what I was looking for, so I started working on creating it myself.
Wow. Yeah, I'm reflecting back what you said a few minutes ago about how the experiences of childhood really shape us. And I remember every summer driving from Arkansas with my family to Virginia, which is where my mother's parents lived. And my grandparents would keep the four of us for a portion of every summer. And every day we had a mandated hour of quiet. Now, we didn't have to go to sleep, but we couldn't have anything with noise, no television, no radio. And this was, I'm dating myself, before video games. The video games weren't even an option. So we could read a book, we could color, or we could just sit and be quiet or take a nap. And I really think that forced hour of quiet every day paved the way for me to be able to pray and to, bring down the voices in my head and to sort of center myself. And I think the reason my grandmother did it was she needed a nap after having, 4 rambunctious kids most of the day at that point. But that pattern really laid a foundation for me. So I think you're right. The things that happen in childhood can really bear fruit many years later sometimes, not always in the moment.
Yeah, certainly.
So who do you market the podcast to? Have you done analytics? Do you know what sorts of households or families are choosing to utilize the podcast?
I haven't done any sort of official research kind of into that, but I anecdotally, I hear from listeners often. They'll send emails or leave comments on Instagram or write reviews of the podcast. And, I started because when I started the podcast at home, I had I think they were 3 and 5 at the time, somewhere close to those ages. And really it was my 5-year-old at the time, who's now 8, was who I was thinking of when I was writing. And so early on, I would say the podcast was for 4 to 8-year-olds because that was kind of what it was centered around. But then I started hearing from parents who said, I listen every day with my 18-month child. And I hope they're, they can't talk yet, but I hope they're taking in these messages.
Yeah.
And then I would hear from, a 12 or 13-year-old listener who said, this is the only way I can go to sleep tonight is if I listen to this podcast first. And so I've stopped kind of assigning an age range to it. And even I've heard from adults who say that they, I don't even have kids, but I just like it. And I think that comes from mindfulness. For a lot of people can be something that feels a little stuffy or pretentious or I'm not the kind of person that does that. I'm not going to sit still and, I think a lot of people have certain connotations for it. And what I wanted to do for kids, I think, is also helpful for adults, is just to simplify, to just make it something that's a fun experience, that's not a pressure that you have to do, but that is something that you enjoy. And another unexpected outlet I've found for it has been in classrooms. Many schools have either social emotional learning aspect or sometimes specifically mindfulness. that's either their school or their district may require a teacher to have a mindfulness. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those teachers have been given all of the tools and resources they need to be able to implement mindfulness. So I hear from a lot of teachers who are playing the podcast in the rooms, and I love teachers, so I'm glad to be able to take 15 minutes off of their plate every once in a while.
Yeah, I think my experience of it was 14 to 15 minutes. It wasn't overwhelming. Sometimes people think, well, do I have to fill up an hour or 2 hours or whatever? And there's not a whole lot of just silence, right? There's sort of background music, and your voice is very soothing, and it's interactive because you're asked to repeat affirmations back. So you're not just sitting there in silence. It really is in sort of a whole experience. Was that intentional, that you wanted people to have a participatory part of it?
Yeah, that was very intentional. And, you spoke a moment ago about, your grandparents having you sit in silence for an hour, and, then you cut into the heart of why that probably was. Your grandmother just needed some quiet time to take a nap or whatever. And I find that's very common these days for parents. And parents and educators are really concerned with screen time these days. And yet parents need something for their kids to do while they do the dishes and make dinner and do things around the house or get work done or whatever it may be. And so I saw podcasting as a great place where it is, it's screen free. And parents can feel good about that, but it's engaging. It's something for the kids to do while parents are doing other things. But I wanted it to be an engaging experience, not a passive, like the way you watch television is often just passively taking in whatever's on the screen. I think when you take away that visual and you've just got something to listen to, it engages your brain in different ways. And I wanted it to feel like a conversation. And back to Mr. Rogers, like I really thought of it as I was developing it as that opening scene of every Mr. Rogers episode where he's in the living room and he's looking into the camera and he's speaking directly to you. Right. And, you would hear stories of kids who would ask, well, why when I ask Mr. Rogers a question, why doesn't he hear me? Or how does he get in and out of the TV? And so that kind of the relationship that can develop is something I was interested in. And, I specifically say that at the beginning of every podcast, like when I ask you questions or ask you to repeat affirmations, you can say them out loud, or if you're more comfortable, you can just say it quietly in your head. But definitely want it to be an experience that engages minds, and that kids feel like they're an active part of.
Yeah. Have you noticed any differences in terms of the sorts of questions or things since COVID, in terms of what you've been hearing from parents? Do you think that with this pandemic, parents are even more interested in finding things to help keep kids centered and focused? Because I can imagine if it's been difficult for us as adults, it's probably been really traumatic for the younger generation.
Well, I'll answer that in two ways that might seem a little contradictory. But, first I'll say I launched the podcast in January of 2020.
Oh, wow. Right before it started.
Yeah, so I didn't have a lot of, most of it has been during COVID. It was something I saw a need for before COVID, but I definitely... I think a lot of us have become a lot more aware of just the importance of valuing mental health for kids and the experience they're going through. But the other side of that, I would say, is particularly for the youngest kids. I have a one of the last times I had people over to the house, a big group of people, was for my youngest daughter's 3rd birthday in late February of 2020.
Wow.
And so for a child like that, being so young, I did worry early on, what's this experience going to be like? But I started to realize when you're young, when you're first born, everything is a new experience. You've never done anything before. So each time you experience something, it's how you know the world, and it's how you see the world. So I think in some ways, young kids just developmentally have adapted better than a lot of us adults, who we all had 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, however many years
of a routine, or
of this is what the world is supposed to be, and suddenly it's different for us. And I think in a way, if you allow it to, as an adult, it can help you look at the world the way a young child sees it, with the uncertainty and the learning and the let me figure out how to do things now. I think certainly for older children, it was a more difficult experience.
That's
I think
true.
the longer you'd been in school, and the deeper friendships you had with others outside of your household, I think the harder it was to have that disrupted. But I've found it interesting to see how well younger children have just, and of course it's been difficult for many of them, but in a sense others have also kind of just not skipped a beat, because this is just the world that they're growing up in, and how things have been as long as they can remember. So.
Yeah. So I want to take this conversation in a slightly different direction, because I know that you have been spearheading the efforts at Calvary Episcopal Church, one of the churches in the diocese, to live stream their worship services. And I will say that before March of 2020, there wasn't one congregation in the diocese doing any sort of live stream or broadcasting services via Zoom or any social media, Facebook Live. And I was just amazed at the creativity of congregations to really pivot very quickly and start doing that. But we're a couple of years now into this whole worship online, right? And there are lots of conversations in the church about, at least in the Episcopal Church, because many of our congregations weren't, can you foster community online? What will this look like moving forward? Will this continue to be a part of our worship experience, to have both in person and online? And given that you've been someone sort of behind the camera, as it were, do you have any initial thoughts or reflections about that transition, and sort of your thoughts about what worship is going to look like moving forward?
Well, I remember at this point, it can be hard to remember those early days of COVID, but I remember a time when it seemed that the common thought was, we're going to shut things down for 8 weeks, and then we'll be done. Then we'll come back. And so initially, Scott Walters, the rector at Calvary, said, hey, can you come for 8 weeks and kind of help us figure out a live stream? And at first I was bringing some of my own camera gear. I had to buy a few kind of adapters to connect them to my computer to stream, but it was me with gear in the center of the aisle on a folding table. And it's been through several iterations of as things stretch, showing we need to find a more permanent solution. Oh, and we need to find a long-term permanent solution now. But my perspective, I think, was driven especially early on because I'm new to the Episcopal Church. I grew up, as I said, in non-denominational churches. now I would say evangelical. I didn't hear that word growing up,
Right.
but and I was involved in a lot of young churches, church plants, kind of unbound to any sort of
tradition. Right.
And that was something that drew me to the Episcopal Church, was wanting to be a part of something that had a history, but also the love and the welcome of the church that I found in the Episcopal Church. And technology-wise, a lot of these young church plants, they're great with the tech team, and they're very online. And I had found this new experience for me in the Episcopal Church, and I didn't want to lose that, and to see all of the young hip church plants who are on top of technology. Like I knew they would be okay, but I thought, like, hey, I don't want to lose this experience that I've just discovered in the Episcopal Church. So it's been fascinating to see those changes, and I don't know that I have any big predictions or visions about where it'll go, but I do think it's great to see all of the unintended positive aspects of it. There's many negative aspects of these last few years, but I've heard a lot of stories of older congregants who weren't able to go to church even before COVID,
right?
And now church was able to
come to them.
To them.
Yes,
and just that extra level of accessibility for which I think is reflective of who the Episcopal Church is. That all are welcome. And pre-COVID, just through doing church the way church had always been done, there were some people who, while they would have been welcome in spirit, were not necessarily welcome physically, just because of their ability to get through the door. And so it's great to see those new ways of connecting open up for more people.
Yeah, I definitely have heard from some of our older and homebound parishioners that they have felt on an even footing with everybody else, because everyone else was at home watching worship or participating in Christian formation online. And they don't want us to go back to the way things were in March of 2020. They want us to continue to have some sort of an online presence. So I tend to think that we're going to have it moving forward. Maybe it's good job security for you, Noah, that we're going to continue doing it. You should mentioned connections, and what's coming out for me listening to these various strands of who you are is that you're a curator of connections in lots of different ways. And I think back in the Bible to the stories of Jesus, and he was, the ultimate, connector, how he really saw every person for who they were. He respected every person, and especially children. And children had no status in that very patriarchal first century paterfamilias culture, right? It was the man of the household who had sort of all the power, then trickling down, and children were kind of at the bottom of the totem pole. So it seems to me that to the extent that you encourage adults to really see children and be present for children in new ways, that we're just continuing things that started off really in the biblical narrative. Have you ever thought about sort of Jesus's posture towards children as you are doing your mindfulness and podcast stuff?
I don't particularly tend to think of it in the podcast and mindfulness, but that idea of the welcoming children, I think often of of that passage where, people are bringing children to Jesus, and others are, for whatever reason, like,
adults,
no, send them away. Like, oh no, they're a bother, and Jesus is like, no, bring them to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that, and actually one of the first exposures to the Episcopal Church I had, I'd never even heard of the Episcopal Church growing up. But I was at a conference where Stephen Bush was speaking. He was the Shelby County Public Defender at the time.
And he's the husband of Catherine Bush,
yes,
a priest in the diocese.
At my church, yeah.
Yes.
And so he was speaking about the criminal justice system and need for reform in that. And just in passing, he mentioned being a cradle Episcopalian and the baptismal prayer.
Covenant, yeah.
And as many times as I've related this to other Episcopalians about, I can never quite get the words right, but it's the part about the dignity of every...
Yes, to respect the dignity of every human being, yeah.
And so I think, where many divisions and come about is when we choose which human beings we're not going to respect the dignity of. And of course, throughout history, that's been women, that's been minorities, that's often been children. But
sometimes the elderly.
Yeah.
Yeah. The people who aren't completely physically able, physical challenges. Yeah.
And so, I think that's a lot of what I'm doing is just respecting the dignity of childhood.
I love that. That sounds like Stephen Bush sort of made those connections, which it's always, as an ordained person, you love it when a person is not just thinking about their relationship with however you consider God or the higher power during a worship service, but really saying in all aspects of my life, including my vocation, my paid job, my leisure, my relationships with family and friends, how am I living into what my faith teaches? So I think it's beautiful that in the midst of a conference about, justice reform, he could talk about and feel comfortable talking about the baptismal covenant and the aspects of his faith that really influenced his job. I think that's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, I agree. I'll admit that I'm somewhat hesitant to talk too much about faith in connection with the work that I'm doing, because I do recognize, through my own experience and experience of many of my friends and peers who have not been welcomed in the churches that they grew up in. I don't want anyone to feel that, because I'm a person of faith, communicating with children, I think there can be a suspicion that they're going to try to
proselytize or brainwash or whatever. Yeah.
So there's certainly... I kind of keep
it's a fine line,
where my motivations for respecting the dignity of people may be drawn from my faith, but I'm also wanting to create a space that everyone feels safe and welcome and doesn't have to carry whatever baggage of their own upbringing may be still hanging with them.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And I do think that when you're in person and you're able, there's a back and forth and someone can be in a conversation with you about faith or to get clarification, that's a safer environment than if you're just putting something out there and a person who may have questions can't sort of unpack it with you. I agree. It's a thin line. Well, Noah, I wonder, there's so many things going on in this world, and sometimes I have to just limit even my intake of the news, so much negativity. But I wonder, what is giving you a sense of hope about the future and about sort of the potential right now, even in the midst of all of these various pandemics and really challenging times that we find ourselves in?
Well, it has been a challenging time for hope, I think. I've always been a hopeful person, a trusting person, and I think there's times in this years that hope and that trust has been tested and has been stretched thin, and it can be hard sometimes. But I think I have a lot of hope. I think it's fairly clear in children, and just that I see a lot of young people who care about the future that they're going to live into, and using young people broadly to, I'm a millennial, and I've always bristled at I've never liked the kind of fighting between generations of and so I now look at Gen Z and whatever we call things after that as not something to be suspicious of, and they're doing things the wrong way. But I see a lot of hope in, like, they're going to come up and hopefully they're going to fix some of the things that the generations that came before have messed up.
Yep.
And but I see a lot of passion, and I see a lot of desire to put things right in younger generations, and so that brings me hope.
Excellent. Well, Noah, thank you so much for being with us today, and just want to encourage you to keep being a curator of connections.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. Appreciate that framing of what I do. So thank you.
Sister and my brother, thank you for my food and the things I drink, thank you for my mind and the things I think, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. For my family and my friends, thank you, thank you. For the courage that grows within, thank you, thank you. For a heart that helps me love, thank you. For the sun that shines above, to help, thank you, thank you. For my body and for my health, thank you, thank you. For the energy as I play, thank you, thank you. And for the rest at the end of the day,
So we just heard a selection, thank you, that was actually written and performed by Noah Glenn, our special guest this week. So just a reminder that today was the first day in a series of programs that will actually run through mid-April, and the series about how we can help and support children to blossom. So we hope if this is a topic of interest to you, you will tune in. Next week, Emily Austin, our Diocesan Minister of Communication, will interview retired educator Sandra Turner about the impact of early childhood education on families and communities. So we encourage you to listen to Faithfully Memphis and also the Like You Mindfulness podcast for kids, wherever you normally get your podcasts, including Spotify and Apple Music. Listen to our podcasts and like us. We look forward to being with you next week. And so until then, sisters and brothers, stay safe and stay positive.